Well, good morning, everyone. I'm pleased today to be joined by my colleague, Cyril Turton, the MLA for Spruce Grove, Stony Plain. Cyril's here today because he's helped me from day one with developing this strategy and developing the key pieces for this legislation on critical and rare earth minerals. To start with, worldwide demand for critical and rare earth minerals is growing in response to rising populations, technological advancement, global transformation to a low-carbon economy, and national security interests. In fact, the World Bank has predicted a 500% increase by 2050 in the production of minerals, just to feed the clean energy demand alone. That's why the Alberta government has been developing a strategy to modernize the province's approach to mineral development and to capitalize on this prime opportunity. I'm pleased to release this strategy today, along with the tabling of Bill 82, the Mineral Resource Development Act. But before I get into the specifics of what it contains, I want to provide some context on the role which minerals play in our day-to-day lives right now. Starting with smartphones and electronics that most of us carry in our pockets and purses, minerals play a very big role in our everyday lives. For example, lithium is needed for electric vehicles and battery storage, vanadium for energy storage systems, and titanium alloys and rare earth elements for batteries and electronics. Most notably, critical and rare earth minerals are essential to the technology and products that support a low-carbon economy. Alberta has the potential to become a preferred international producer and supplier for these minerals, and to be at the forefront of global mineral exploration and development. And that's where our strategy comes in. Today, I'm excited to present Renewing Alberta's Mineral Future, a plan that will help re-energize and advance our province's mineral sector and will continue to diversify our economy as a key part of Alberta's recovery plan. It will build on Alberta's existing advantages to turn this vision into a reality. Our province is home to vast, untapped geological potential, and we have an experienced workforce. Alberta has deposits right across the province, many of which have been identified as critical and strategic minerals. This includes lithium in formation waters in south central and west central Alberta, vanadium, rare earth elements, and titanium in oil sands waste streams, potash in eastern Alberta, and uranium in northern Alberta. And this is based on our current mapping of minerals in the province. This means that the geological potential could be even greater. And that is why we've invested $28 million into putting in a regulatory framework for minerals and geothermal and for mineral mapping. We also have the necessary infrastructure in place to support an expanded and growing mineral sector, and we have a long track record as a global leader in responsible resource development. These are all advantages that Alberta wasn't leveraging until now. We knew that had to change. The last strategy developed was in 2002, nearly 20 years ago. It wasn't pursued, but now is the time for a renewed strategy. As I've said, metallic and industrial minerals are vital in supporting the deployment of clean energy technologies and overall economic growth. To be very clear, the scope of this strategy does not include coal, and it does not include sand or gravel. The strategy and action plan sets a strategic direction that will help Alberta meet increasing demand while creating jobs and attracting investment. The strategy also outlines the importance of responsible exploration, development, manufacturing, and recycling of minerals and mineral products. This is significant because mineral exploration and development is changing rapidly, and new technologies will reduce environmental footprint and lower costs compared with past operations. Through technological advancements, companies are looking to extract and produce minerals from both primary sources, such as rock and deep saline brines, and secondary sources, such as reprocessing wastes or byproducts from existing oil and gas operations. We realize that it will take time and resources to realize our vision. That's why Renewing Alberta's Mineral Future outlines key areas and action items over the short, medium, and long term to ensure that we remain on track. The strategy includes 6 key areas to support and achieve Alberta's vision. First, increase public geoscience. Second, enhance the fiscal and regulatory framework. Third, promote responsible development. Fourth, advance opportunities for Indigenous peoples. 5, develop public awareness and a skilled workforce. And finally, to promote innovation and industrial development. And today, we will be taking one step further by beginning its implementation immediately. Today, I will be introducing legislation to help address one of the key areas, and that is the current mineral regulatory functions. Right now, they are fragmented and split among multiple departments and agencies. Bill 82, the Mineral Resource Development Act, will enhance the regulatory environment by streamlining and consolidating these regulatory functions. If passed, the legislation would establish the Alberta Energy Regulator, the AER, as the full life cycle regulator for Alberta's mineral resources, from exploration to reclamation, from cradle to grave. Along with the Responsible Energy Development Act and amendments to other related acts, the legislation would provide the AER with the authority to regulate mineral resources. In effect, the AER's authority over minerals would align with its authority over other energy resources. This kind of one-window approach would provide regulatory clarity and predictability for industry, while also protecting the best interests of Albertans by ensuring the safe, orderly, efficient, and responsible development of the province's mineral resources. Before I conclude, I'd like to thank everyone who provided input into the strategy and action plan. First and foremost, the Mineral Advisory Council. Their advice and recommendations were essential as government began to put pen to paper. Throughout the process, we also engaged with a broad representation of stakeholders, including First Nations and Métis and Indigenous organizations, industry, provincial and federal governments and agencies, environmental organizations, regional watershed groups, academia, investors and financial advisors, rural municipalities, and landowners. And we were guided by the ongoing work with federal and provincial and territorial governments and partners, such as our cooperation with the Northwest Territories, our cooperation on the Canadian Minerals and Metals Plan, and the Canada-US Joint Action on Critical Minerals Collaboration. We'll continue to work with our partners as we move forward, and it's through these contributions that we were able to develop a strategy and action plan that will actually help enhance and advance Alberta's mineral industry. I'm excited about the future of this industry, and I'm confident that Alberta can realize our mineral potential. Thank you, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks. Before we head to the phones, just a quick reminder to all the media participating today that the information provided in this news conference is strictly embargoed until the minister rises in the legislature this afternoon to table Bill 82. With that information in mind, let's head to the phones with our first caller.
Emma Greeny, Globe and Mail.
Yeah, g'day. Thanks for taking my questions. First one off the bat here. Many other countries are pursuing similar mineral plans, right? So what makes you think Alberta can just steamroll the opposition? I mean, I know we have oil and gas, but how can we actually do it better when other jurisdictions have such a head start?
Well, you're right that there's a world competition to produce this resource. We know that there's a 500%, at least a 500% increase in demand for these types of critical and rare earth minerals, and every jurisdiction is going to be looking to compete with Alberta. We think we have some definite advantages here, and I think it builds on the cornerstone of our oil and gas industry and their expertise, and particularly in the brines and developing mineral potential through brines and brine waters. We also have an advantageous tax regime here, and we've been working to reduce regulatory burden and red tape. We have an environment in Alberta that supports energy resource development, and we have the mineral here. And I can tell you that with mineral mapping, we've only just started, and you'll see maps in the materials that have been provided showing across the province where we think there's lithium, where there's uranium, where there's potash, where there's titanium, graphite, vanadium, but Alberta has an advantage, and that's over 100 years of drilling expertise in the province. And with each well that was drilled over the last 100 years, and there's something like 460,000 of them, core samples have been retained and stored and analyzed. So we know the core samples from the surface to the depth of a well, and up with those core samples are various minerals. So I think we have some advantage in mineral mapping and being able to digitize that and understand where the resources are. I think that'll be a huge attraction for investors looking at a place to ensure that there's a safe mineral resource.
Follow-up, Emma?
I sure do. Actually, I'm going to be cheeky and switch gears here for a moment to the Allen inquiry. I'm curious what the next steps are with that report and how you're going to make sure it just doesn't do what most governments report do and get left on a shelf gathering dust somewhere. Or are you going to quietly file it away and be like, yep, well, done with this, stuff your hands with it?
No, we're learning from the findings of the report, 600 pages of it that documented the way and the manner in which environmental organizations cooperated and shared and collaborated and used the best abilities of each of those organizations to target our oil and gas industry. And what we want to learn from that is how they did that and where they're going next. Because we're already seeing signs of where they're going next. We saw letters signed by 500 environmental organizations, including at least 8 that were named in the Allen inquiry, that are now telling Canada, letter to the Prime Minister, that carbon capture and storage is not a solution to getting to net zero. Well, the International Energy Agency has said there is no path to net zero that doesn't include carbon capture, and yet these organizations are saying no way. So we know in Alberta we don't have a path to net zero without carbon capture, and our oil sands pathway initiative is going to rely upon it. So we need to learn from what the Allen inquiry said on what their techniques and how they did it, and make sure it doesn't happen to the resources of the future, including rare earth and critical minerals. And ironically, some of we know we need lithium across the world, global demand for it, to get electrification to produce electric batteries for cars. And yet across North America, we're seeing lithium mines shut down by some of these environmental organizations. We saw it was either a cobalt or a nickel mine in Alaska shut down. A lot of, we have to make sure that we're able to develop our resources here and the energy resources of the future.
We'll take our next caller from the phones.
Catherine Grgowski, Alberta Today.
Well, thanks for taking my question, Minister. So in the report, it says there's an immediate term and intermediate term. So in the immediate term, 2 years, spelling out those regulations for orphan assets management, liability closure. Of course, in the next 2 years, there's going to be an election. So is the intent to get those regulations out before the election or after?
Well, I think the legislation is enabling legislation that will then set up for making regulations that'll be government regulations, order in council, cabinet regulations, as well as regulations within the AER. I think we're doing a staged approach so that we can move very quickly on the brines, things like lithium and brine, because we have near-term investment right away that needs some certainty. So we'll be moving extremely quickly. The legislation will be passed, hopefully will be passed this fall, which will enable the regulator to move very, very quickly on the regulations. We're also ensuring that they're well-resourced at the AER to do that regulatory piece, and we've provided them with grant and budget in last year's budget to be able to facilitate this work and do it quickly. And it's going to need to happen quickly because we have investors that need it to happen quickly.
And do you have a follow-up, Catherine?
Yeah, and in that intermediary piece, the 2 to 5 years, it says there's going to be a royalty review. Is there anything in the legislation that says that royalty review has to happen, or is that just a plan?
No, I think it's what will need to happen is to give the certainty and predictability for companies to be able to make an investment decision. They have to understand what the royalty will be for these various critical and rare earth minerals, because that's a cost to them. So we're going to have to work with industry to set that royalty. That's a piece that will come in the near term.
We'll move to our next caller.
Tim Burt, CTV.
Hi, I just want to cover a different topic here. Hoping to get your opinion on the latest announcement from Scotland surrounding subsidies for oil and gas companies outside of the country.
Well, sure. I guess there's a lot of things happening over in COP right now. Not the least of which was the Prime Minister's announcement that there would be. He's working on a hard cap on emissions in oil and gas in Canada. So he's over there on a photo opportunity making these announcements, and they're vague. We don't know what the target will be, when the dates will be, where they will go to. So it's extremely vague, and to couple with that is the fact that he can't do any of that without the provinces and territories involved. And the provinces, that's because the provinces own those resources under the Constitution and have the exclusive constitutional authority to develop and produce them, along with Indigenous people who are looking to be part of that energy future and to share in the wealth. So he's over there making these announcements that are pretty vague, and you can't forget that he's putting Canada as an outlier with all the other nations in the world that are oil producing. Other nations, including Norway, have actually said they need to continue production or ramp it up so that they can actually be able to meet and afford and get to net zero. That includes Russia and OPEC nations who are actually ramping up production. It includes African nations who say they have to produce oil and gas so they can develop their economies. And meanwhile, you've got consuming nations that are saying, give us more oil. We need more oil. We need to ramp up in production. That includes the United States, India, Japan, all of this happening over in Scotland, and the Prime Minister's up on stage as an outlier announcing that Canada will have a hard cap. And I didn't hear him say not once that Alberta's already doing that industry's already doing it, that there's already a hard cap, 100 megaton hard cap on emissions in the oil sands, that our oil sands have already committed to getting to net zero with their Pathways initiative, that methane emissions have already reduced by 45% by 2025. So he failed to mention all the good things that are happening here in Alberta. So we stayed home here to get things done, to work on things like the critical and rare earth mineral strategy that's going to be needed to get to net zero. Hydrogen is going to be needed to get to net zero. We're working on emission reduction. We're working with the Pathway Initiative. We're working on our carbon capture CCUS hubs, of which we have dozens of applications and expressions of interest for carbon sequestration hubs right across the province. So we're staying here at home to get things done. And it's just a whole lot of hypocrisy over in Scotland.
Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, you mentioned there that a lot of producers in Alberta and Canada, for that matter, have already committed to going net zero by 2050. So that all being said, what's your main concern with what the Prime Minister has said in Scotland? And kind of on that, do you think a member of your government, maybe a high-ranking government member of your government, rather, being in Scotland could have maybe swayed some of these announcements at all?
Well, I think one of the things that the message it sends when he's over there making those announcements, it sends a signal to investors, a very negative signal to investors. We've seen divestment campaigns target oil and gas, and as a result, we are now in a situation globally where supply is lacking demand because, in large part, because of these divestment campaigns. I think it sends a negative signal, and I think it shows, also demonstrates the hypocrisy of where we are with other nations ramping up production, asking for increased production. We see fuel switching in Europe to switch to dirtier sources. We see China looking at getting back, increasing coal. We saw the United States last year, coal production, coal use actually went up, and in Europe, across the European Union, they're now subsidizing natural gas pipelines to ensure a sufficient supply. So I think it just sends the wrong message to investors that Canada is potentially an outlier, and failing to talk about what's already happening in Canada. It's a photo op.
We'll move to our next caller.
Dylan Short, Post Media.
Hi there. I'm just curious, what specifically in the framework being announced later today will help make sure that everything is done in a a remedial way, so that in a few years we're not talking about abandoned mines or abandoned explorations in the way that we're now talking about abandoned oil and gas wells.
Well, thank you for that question, and we definitely cannot let the liability management for critical and rare earth minerals develop in the way that it did for oil and gas. And the problem we're faced with oil and gas liabilities and inactive and abandoned wells is because for decades of development, we didn't have adequate rules in place, and that was compounded when the price dropped in 2015, between 2015 and 2019. The whole thing was compounded by the allowance of wells to be transferred from financially stronger companies to less financially strong. We can never let that happen in critical and rare earth minerals, and that's why we're in a good position, because we're developing regulations and developing the framework. And so to start off, we'll be setting rules, and rules will be set within the AER to manage the liability management and the end of life management for any mineral resources.
Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I guess just following up on that, if you'll be setting rules and regulations, do you have examples of what those rules might be once everything is set in stone? And then also, just because we're limited here, hoping to also just get some background on how this industry is currently regulated. I know that it says there's multiple different departments and agencies involved. I'm just looking to see, what exactly those departments and agencies are.
Well, I think starting with your last question first, what we're looking at doing is one-stop regulation, full life cycle regulation, cradle-to-grave regulation within the Alberta Energy Regulator. And I think that sets a framework to make sure that the environmental responsibilities and the safety, the integrity, it's all the conservation of the resource is all managed in one place. So what we're doing with this legislation is similar to what happens in oil and gas, is we've got a one-stop place with a life cycle regulator. I think that actually is going to give us an advantage in Alberta to have that regulatory certainty. And it was one area where we received strong advice from our industry advisory committee on making sure it was one stop. And our advisory committee had environmental experts, Indigenous affairs experts, plus industry experts, and the former Premier of Northwest Territories, who actually developed a similar type of mineral regime. So we followed their advice on where's the best place to regulate it. And your first question, again? Sorry, I talked too long on the second. I get excited about this stuff. What was the first question again?
I was just looking for, I guess, if there's any specific examples on in enforcing cleanup and remediation. Like if someone abandons a mine site or leaves a mine site, would there be fines for that, or how would that specifically be regulated?
Well, and that's in Part 4 of the legislation in Bill 82 will be is the regulatory making authorities. So there'll be both regulatory making authorities for both the provincial government and for the Alberta Energy Regulator. And a lot of this will parallel what types of regulations. The content will be different, but the types of regulations that are in place for oil and gas that deal with the full life cycle of a project. So those things will be developed. But again, we have a real advantage here of developing these things from scratch to make sure that they provide for environmental oversight and safe operation.
And we'll take our last caller for today.
Scott Dipple, CBC.
Hi, Minister. Notwithstanding that Alberta governments in past decades could not have known the future demand for, flat-screen smartphones, batteries for electric vehicles, do you have a better understanding now over the work that's happened over the past year on this strategy? Why has Alberta never really developed its mineral potential?
Well, that's interesting. The last strategy that was put in place was in 2002, and I think it was when Premier Klein was in power and Murray Smith was the energy minister. And so there was a strategy, but it wasn't really pursued. And I think it's because there was so much activity in oil and gas, and with that potential labor shortages, and the renewables market and the low carbon future wasn't yet clear. The demand for these resources wasn't there. I don't think many people were talking about lithium 20 years ago. They weren't talking about the need for cobalt and nickel for batteries. They weren't talking about vanadium for energy storage. So a lot of these things are new and emerging, and the demand for them has developed. And what we found is strategically the places that are developing these resources are countries like China. And so there's geopolitical issues, and there's other countries that are developing them that don't have the same labor and environmental standards. So I think what we see here and what we see ahead for the future for right now was definitely not there 20 years ago. This is a new opportunity, a new and emerging opportunity over the last 5-6 years that's really emerged, and we're pursuing it in a very big way right now.
And a follow-up?
Oh. Yes, one other thing, and that is, for Albertans who don't have the benefit of seeing the materials that we have in front of us today, it does sound like sort of a chicken and egg situation. I wanted to know, are you hearing from industry, here's what we'd like to do in Alberta, here's what we want to explore, or is this, we have to get things in order and then go out after these opportunities, which, as you say, are international in scope?
It's both. It's both. We developed the plan in consultation with a range of stakeholders, saying what do we need to do here to attract the investment, and they set out 6 priorities of the things that are important to make Alberta a destination of choice. So we heard from them, and that's in the strategy, and we heard from them how to sequence it, what's most important to develop first and move quickly. And with Bill 82, that was on the regulatory piece, that was pretty much top of mind. We can't proceed forward with this and attract the investment if we don't have certainty on what the regulations will be. Key, and then another key step will be the mineral mapping. So it's both. We know that we were advised that these were the things that needed to be moved on and quickly, and now we're setting in the framework so that we can go out and hustle and attract this investment and talk to investors. And we've had lots of interest and conversations and a lot of interest come to us throughout this consultation process of where the international investor interest might be.
And on that note, that wraps up our press conference. Thank you.